everyone! As you know, I am starting my new series of watercolor weekends, and while Inktense are not a watercolor, they are water soluble. So I will be including watercolor pencils and water soluble mediums in my watercolor weekends just to make it easier for grouping it together. One thing I wanted to do in this series was do a lot of Inktense. Inktense are a very daunting pencil for beginners. You know what, actually they're daunting for all of us. And I wanted to kind of show you guys some fun ways to use them. So consider this kind of a mini series within my series of watercolor weekends. And how I'm going to work it is I'll just have beginner-based tutorials for the Inktense. My goal is to kind of get you over the fear of using them and show you how versatile and fun these pencils can be. So today, we're going to talk about activating Inktense. Now, if you were to go on Pinterest or go on one of those crazy ones where they're like 20 ways to do this, I mean, literally there's a ton of ways you could activate Inktense, and I almost went down that rabbit hole for you guys, but then I was like, no, let's keep it normal. So I am sticking to the most basic ways. Now, are there more than 4 ways to activate your Inktense? Oh yeah, for sure. I could seriously go on and on. But we'll get into that another day. So I think I'm going to use a pretty dark purple today. So we're going to do 4 ways, and I'm going to show you. Now, first one will be water and brush. Water brush, 2 different things. Water-based blender, which means colorless blender, and an alcohol-based colorless blender. So I'm just going to work with dark purple. This works on any color, by the way, but the point of this, I'm laying down a light layer. The entire point of this is I want you to see the differences between using these methods, because each method will actually give you a different result. So that's why I'm going to use the same color so that you can see what I mean. And they each have their pros and cons, so that's something you really need to keep in mind. Now let me zoom you in so that you guys can actually see the changes we're about to make here. Okay, so water and brush literally means jar of water, using my paint puck that you guys know I'm in love with, and a paintbrush. I would recommend a watercolor brush, but you can use any brush, honestly. It depends on how you're using these. In this case, I am going to use just a little, what is this, number 6 round, but you don't have to do that. It's entirely up to you. Oops, sorry for the autofocus there. Hi there. So yeah, let's get this going. So basically you're just going to wet your brush. Now, the water and brush method is probably my least favorite. In fact, let me move this over, because one thing I really want to emphasize here is that we're going to have to dry off our brush really well, okay? You don't want a ton of water here, which is why the water brush tends to be a little better. So I'm wiping it off pretty well. You can even use a cloth and just make it nice and damp. But now we're going to activate it. So we're just going to see how that color just pops right off of there. And we'll even drag it so you can see how it lightens up. Now it is leaving some lines, but that's okay. I can always go back in with a little more water. Pull it out a little more. Now remember, Inktense is permanent. So what you put down is what you get. It's not permanent while dry. Now this is just me dragging it. I'm not really worrying about making this perfection, just by the way. Let me just put my brush there to dry. Okay, water brush. Any brand of water brush will do. We all have our favorites. This here is just the Zig Kuretake Zig Detailer. I own quite a few different ones as well. They all do about the same, but you just prime your brush, get it wet, and then same thing, just go in there and activate it. And then I just drag it along if I want to kind of see how the color drags out. But again, you can see, in fact, and I'll zoom in a tiny bit more for you guys. So you can see, you know, some of the paper coming through. Now this is one of my favorite cardstocks, Nina 110 pound. It's similar to a lot of coloring books. So if you're planning on using this in a coloring book, this is good to know. Now these will react differently on watercolor paper, same thing with mixed media. Okay, water-based blender. So that's a clear blender. I'm using the Tombow ABT. You can use any clear water-based blender. I know Amazon has their own water brushes or watercolor brushes, and they come with a clear blender. I don't think they sell it separate though. You can do the Kuretake one. They have a clear water-based. I think Ohuhu does now with their new set. Basically any will do. You don't have to buy Tombow. I just bought Tombow because you can buy them open stock and they're just easier to get a hold of. Okay, so if I were to activate this with the Tombow, which is water-based, and everything here so far has also activated with water. Now you're going to notice some differences. First of all, I don't have as much, it's not as juicy, right? It's just basically activating the color, and that's that. Just clean that off. The Tombow is actually self-cleaning, so they say, but I don't know how true that is. But one thing you'll notice is the color is brighter, more vibrant here than being watered down with the brushes, okay? Now, alcohol blenders. Literally any colorless alcohol blender will do. I have a whole boatload of just random ones, like I've got Artify, Ohuhu, Blick, Copic. Literally anything will do. I stick to the brush ones though. You don't have to, but I prefer to use the brush. Mine is already stained a little because I have obviously been using this. But let's activate this. And there you go. Now one thing you will notice, let me just dry that off. The color is a little bit duller with the alcohol-based blender. The reason for that is these suck up color. They're not forgiving. You do not want to go back and forth over something with your alcohol blender because you'll actually start to erase your color. It'll just keep soaking it up. And once this dries, because right now it's wet, once it dries, you'll see how much lighter it is. So in the end though, is it a huge difference between the three? Not really. So it really depends on what you're using it for. Now, if I'm working in a coloring book, let's face it, most coloring books cannot handle the water of a water brush or water and brush. So I tend to use a water-based blender or an alcohol-based blender. They work just fine. They don't introduce a ton of water, so you can actually use them in Johanna Basford, Creative Haven, any book, honestly. And the color is still just as beautiful and vibrant. I have even some tutorials and color alongs on my channel already showing you guys how to use those. So just keep that in mind. Now, the color will be brighter with these two, but that's because you're not watering it down. You're literally just activating it, and that's it. There's no drag with either of these. You can drag it a tiny bit, but you're not going to get the drag that we're getting here. That's just because you're not activating it enough to pull it, and your brush isn't wet enough to pull it. So really, you're just wetting the color, activating it, and calling it good. Now, if you are working on mixed media paper, or say you're doing a background in a coloring book, You can definitely use one of these methods, but have a heat tool. I use the Ranger heat tool. It looks like a little mini hair dryer. Please do not confuse those for hair dryers. Two different things. But you can use this for your backgrounds. And I would, because you're going to get a lot more easier transitions. It's going to look a lot better. The color is still going to be very pretty. And you can drag it. So you can drag it out, you know, and that's why I'm saying it'll look better for backgrounds. And just use your heat tool and heat it up and dry it, and you won't have as much wrinkling. But you need to make sure that paper can handle water. You know, Create Space paper from Amazon cannot take the water. It will actually break down on you. So instead, I would stick to these two if you're going to use that. And disclaimer, Create Space paper will show lines. It will not fully dissolve using these two methods. You will get it to dissolve with these two, but your paper is going to tear if you add too much water. So you have to be really cautious. Let me show you a quick little blending. I'm just literally picking colors at random. Yeah, those two will be fine. Okay. So again, using dark purple, we're going to blend some colors together. So I have my dark purple and fuchsia. And the entire point of this is I just want to show you the difference when you're blending colors, whether it be for a background or just in your page. You need to know how these blenders are going to react. And also, the rules change just a bit. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so if we're going to do our water and brush, again, you do not want a ton of water on that brush, so make sure it's damp. You're going to go light to dark here. So you're going to activate your lightest color and drag it into the dark. Okay, you can always wipe it off too, but that's the basics of it. You never want to go this way. The color's too concentrated. It'll cover it up. Now, if you're working in a small space, you might actually have to wipe your brush off before you transfer into the next color. Now, with a water brush, same thing. You got to start with your lighter color. And I'm going to blend these out a little bit better so you can see the or you don't see the transition line. Then you can kind of stipple it sometimes if you want to make it less obvious. But again, we went light to dark and blended those out. Okay, using the Tombow. Tombow is also the same thing, light to dark. It's always going to be light to dark. The only difference here is the Tombow is a little stiffer. So you got to keep that in mind. You don't have a nice little brush bending with you. And basically, you want to work in kind of small circles, but not press hard because the Tombow will start to tear apart your paper. I'm going to drag it down just a tiny bit in there. Because this is a water-based blender, it does make your paper peel. That's the biggest problem with the Tombow. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but see the discoloration? That's my paper peeling already. You can see the peel just from the Tombow. Now, that's the biggest problem here is if you're going to go water-based, you might as well just break out the water brushes, right? Because they give you that water effect, but they don't peel your paper like the Tombow. Alcohol, same thing. Oh, if I can get the cap off. Whew, that was a workout. So same thing, you're going to go from the light to the dark, but look, I can work in a circular motion, blending these out. Now I don't want to go back and forth because again, these are not as forgiving, but nothing is peeling here at all. Just clean off that brush. I'm not going to get the peel effect because alcohol dries and evaporates so quickly that it's good to go. I mean, see my blend there? No peeling whatsoever on my paper whereas we got peeling here. You can actually see on the back of the pages as well the water buckling through. This is our water and brush, water brush, and even the Tombow has left an indent. The only one that hasn't is the alcohol marker. So keep that in mind if you have some thin pages. But again, you can tell immediately this color is not as saturated and as luscious as these ones. But here's the deal. The nice thing about alcohol blenders, and I'm not saying this is like the best way or any way, this is one of my favorites because it makes it easier. My other favorite is just a water brush. The thing is this is still wet, this is still wet, this is still wet, this is dry. I want my color darker. I can just go right back on top of it. I would have to get my heat tool out to dry those. I don't have to because my alcohol blender evaporated. I can go back in with a heavier layer. Say I want my pink a lot darker. The more pigment you put down, like, you know, here's a light, here's a medium, and here's a heavy pressure, okay? That's going to impact the amount of color that comes out as well. But I've added my second layer. Now I'm just blending those out with my alcohol marker. And now I have a very rich color, and I can still stipple it as long as I'm gentle back down. Of course, you got to clean these off. But example down here, okay? Here's a light pressure. It washes out pretty easily. Medium pressure, not bad, right? Heavy pressure, see that color? Way brighter. Always clean off your alcohol brush nib. But see, I was able to add more color. I mean, this is a bad blend to do in general, but I was able to add more color. Now, say I wanted to go back over, now that this is dry, can you see that peel? I mean, it's peeling pretty bad, like the paper's already deteriorating. So if I were to go over it, again, like I can even feel this paper and there's little flecks of paper coming off. But just to show you, and by the way, my alcohol marker is dry already. I could go back over it again if I wanted. But see, this is not going to take this layer at all. And this is for your average coloring book. See, my paper is actually peeling right off at this point, like literally flecks of paper peeling right out of there. So that's the one drawback to the Tombow. Like, see all those paper flecks in there? Now say I wanted to go back over this. It's dry enough. I can just lightly add my color back on. Okay. Same thing, just start from your lighter color and pull up into your darker color. And there you go. I've just now added more color to that. The other advantage to activating Inktense using the water and brush or water brush method is I can pull right off the tip and put it down. I can pull off this and make a very concentrated, gorgeous color. Treat it like a watercolor. Same thing with the purple here. It works with all of them. I mean, see how vibrant that is? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Lastly is the Crayon Dash palette. Now, the reason I'm not calling this 5 methods, I guess I could, but I'm stubborn. I can put on the rough side of your palette. By the way, if you have like a cheap cutting board with a rough side, just use that. Don't spend 12 bucks on this thing. Sorry, Crayon Dash. But you can just put them down like this on your palette, okay? And say I wanted to use my water and brush method, meaning the actual paintbrush. I can put them down here, activate that color, look how gorgeous that is, and paint it. Use it just like a paint, watercolor, just remember it's permanent. So unlike watercolor where I put it down and I could reactivate it or lift it, yeah, that's not going to happen here. Once it's down and once it's dry, well, it's all over with. But see how vibrant that is? Now, you could do the same thing with a water brush. You know, you would just drop some water brush on there, pick it up, put it down. Then, of course, you got to clean off your water brush, so you don't clean it off on a rag, but the same thing. You can't do that with the marker methods, so just keep that in mind. This does bring a little bit more versatility to the table, but just clean that off a minute. I usually throw these in the dishwasher. So, but yeah. So those are the ways to activate Inktense. I rarely use the water-based blender just because of the peeling. I mean, look at this paper. It is just torn apart and it's not going to look pretty. I really like the alcohol blender because I love the fact that it dries so quickly. I can layer on top of it. I can keep layering. I can build on top of it. Depending on how heavy of the pigment I put down will also, you know, play a role here. I put light layers on everything we just did today. So outside of that, I really love the paintbrush for putting it on a palette first and then adding it to your paper, or using the water brush using the pencil itself. Now, here's something to keep in mind. If you are the type that feels like you would more likely constantly want it on a palette, then you probably don't want the Inktense pencils. You want either the Inktense blocks, which are nifty little things, or you'll want to get the Inktense actual palette. You can buy them in a pre-made paint palette and do it that way. If you want to treat it like a paint, then I would go about it that way. If you do want the pencil method, you know, say you really want to color in fine lines or you want to sketch something out, you want to activate it, but then you want to still have that freedom to pull it off the tip when you want more concentrated color, then the water brush is a good way to go, and you can use these. And then the alcohol-based blender is just convenient if you literally are going to color with the pencils and activate them. Just keep in mind, you won't have any drag, you won't have the paint effect. Instead, basically look at your alcohol-based blender and even your water-based as just a blender. That's it. So you can shade, create your page however you want, but at the end of the day, you're just using this to blend your colors together. You're not really going for the paint effect. So that's how I look at it. Do I want to just, you know, lazily color a flower in and then just blend the colors together? If I do, then I'm going with my alcohol-based blender. If I want to be able to drag it, create a background, or come back in and add some depth of color later on, then I'm going to probably reach for my water brush. If I want to really paint them out, then I'll put them on a palette with an actual paintbrush. I find it easier to use the paintbrush than the water brush because the water brush you have to keep wetting and wiping on a towel versus just rinsing in a paint puck. So, you know, to each their own on that part though. But yeah, that is the 4-ish, we'll call it, ways to activate your Inktense. I will be doing more Inktense beginner stuff here very soon, but I thought this was a fun way to get going. Again, I do want to emphasize Inktense are not watercolor. They are water-soluble ink, so just remember that is not going to reactivate you. If you wet it, yes, it darkens and it gives you the illusion, but look, see how the color's not dragging along with it? Yeah, that's there for good. So they are ink, but that's what's the beauty here. You can layer on top of them. I could go in and add a brown on top of that if I wanted to. I mean, it would look ugly, but I can do it because it's not going to reactivate. But I do want to include Inktense and watercolor pencils and water-soluble mediums in my watercolor weekends because they kind of all have a centralized theme of water. So it just makes it easier to combine them versus, separating them. And I've had a lot of requests for Inktense, but I also have a lot of requests for watercolor weekends. So I'm trying to make a marriage of the two. If you have questions about activating Inktense, let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know which method you enjoy using. Do you like, and why? I always love to hear, the different ways people like to blend and their reasons for doing it. And then of course, I do have a full color along on my channel using the alcohol-based blender method. I highly recommend it if you're a beginner, because the water brush and paintbrush method do require a little bit more patience and knowledge of how your colors are going to react, and just basically learning how to control water in general. So it takes a little bit more time versus being able to just whip up something real quick. So definitely check that out if you want to do like a little beginner friendly color along. And until next time, I will see you on the next Watercolor Wednesday weekend. I don't know why I keep saying Wednesday. It was originally going to be a Wednesday. I will see you on the next watercolor weekend. There we go. Now we got it. So until then, guys, take care.